So now that we looked at monopolistically competitive market, the other type of firm is, or the fourth and final type of market structure is an oligopoly. Now, an oligopoly is very similar to a monopoly. So, except there's only a few firms, and they can either have a homogeneous product or a heterogeneous. So they're either identical or they can be different. But the basic idea is that there are strong barriers to entry, and these are preventing a lot of firms from entering the market. Now, because there's only a few, long-run profits are possible. Okay? And because they have the market power here, they can make the price, and so that profit maximization, which is price is greater than marginal revenue, equals marginal cost. Now, these can be, for the most part, these barriers to entry are going to be high costs, very high startup costs. Okay? So oil production is an example. Right? There's very few oil producers in the United States. Another big example is cable television. So there's very few cable television providers. Now, it used to be more of a monopoly. Now it's more of an oligopoly because in this area you really have your Verizon, Fios, Comcast, and then the Dish Network. But now you've also been seeing growth of the streaming networks, and so things like Hulu, YouTube Red, I think it's called YouTube Red, Slingbox, and then you have Netflix, which is kind of an alternative to that. But it's still not a monopolistically competitive because there's not too many firms. There's still just a few. Now, what happens is with that, when there's a few, they still have a good amount of power. Okay, they're not fully competing against each other. Same with cell phone providers. There's only a few cell phone providers out there, network providers. Now, the reason why there's so few in both of those is because it's very expensive to get that business up and running. Okay? The only reason why the streaming services are being able to compete with the Verizon, with the Comcast, is because they kind of found a new way to deliver, right? Instead of through the wires. And now they're doing it through the internet. But in general, those are the basic competition or basic characteristics. So now, with an oligopoly, sometimes the firms will try to work together. And by doing so, they'll act as a monopoly. They may try to fix prices or basically collude to where they can find a way to maximize their profits and not have to worry about competing against each other. Now, the problem with this is that it's tough to self-enforce. Now, in the United States, not legal. Okay. And there are times when the government will step in and look at price fixing, they'll look at collusion, and they can impact some pretty hefty fines if firms work together against the consumer. So this brings up what is called the prisoner's dilemma, and this just helps to explain why it's difficult to enforce these arrangements. So let me zoom in here a little bit. Okay, so if you're not familiar with the concept of these prisoner's dilemma, two people get arrested. And they get arrested for a crime. Now, they're separated, so they don't know what the other one is saying. The police, they don't have enough evidence to convict them of the major crime. They do, however, have enough evidence to convict them of a lesser crime. Okay? So they're separated, and the police are trying to talk them into basically ratting out the other one. Okay. So they say this. All right, so we have Bob and Art. So they go to Bob and say, Bob, I'll tell you what. I want to help you out here. If you tell us what Art did, or what you guys did, we'll give you a break. But if you don't, we're gonna, up your sentence if he rats you out. So basically, they say, look, if you both confess, right, you'll get 3 years. But if you tell us what he did, he'll get 10 years. Right? But we'll work a deal out with you where you'll only get a year. Okay. Now, if they both deny because of the lesser crime, they would only get 2 years. And they also go to Art and give the same strategy, or just give the same options. Say, look, if you tell us what you guys did, all right, we'll give you a break, right, and we'll go on Bob. Now the problem is, though, if they both confess, they can't give them both the cushy deal. All right, so they'll end up getting 3 years if they both confess. So here are the options. So Bob can either confess to the crime or deny it. And the same with Art. Okay? Now, if they both deny, they'll both get 2 years for the lesser. If they both confess, they'll get 3 years each. If, however, one confesses and the other denies, so basically one trusts the other one to not say anything, but the other one says, I'm going to go home in a year. The one who confesses gets the deal of a year, while the other gets 10 years. Okay? So now, the reason why it's called the prisoner's dilemma. It's called the prisoner's dilemma because when you look at these options, the best option overall is for them to just both deny. Okay? So look, you both deny, you're in and out in 2 years, all said and done. But here's the problem, and this is where the oligopoly idea comes in, colluding. So let's look at Bob for a second. If Bob, so let's say Art confesses. So if Bob confesses, he'll get 3 years. If he doesn't, he'll get 10. So if Art confesses, Bob's best strategy is to confess. If Art denies, well, Bob can confess. Art's going to go away for 10 years, but Bob's only going to go away for a year. If, however, he denies, he's going to go away for 2 years. So he's still better off by confessing. Now let's look at Art. If Bob confesses, Art would only get 3 years if he confessed versus 10, so he's going to confess there. If Bob denies, Art can still get less by confessing. So here's the problem. So while denying is the best option overall for the two of them, their individual strategies both say, regardless of what the other person does, I should confess because I will get less years. And so we call that a dominant strategy. Art's dominant strategy is to confess. Bob's dominant strategy is to also confess. And so this here, that's what we call a Nash equilibrium, which is what would happen if we kept playing this game. Eventually, they would both get there. Okay, so if you keep them separated for long enough, you can talk to them and say, look, I don't know, he might go first. And so when that happens, that's what they're both going to end up doing, unless they really trust each other. So now, how does this relate to an oligopoly and collusion? Well, with an oligopoly, if both sides work together, right, they're going to be splitting that monopoly profit. If, however, one lowers their price a little bit, right, so they have a lower price, they could get a lot more profit, while the other one who kept their price at that high level could actually be losing out now because they're charging at a higher, they lower the price. If the one firm lowers its price, right, below that monopoly price, right, they could pull away a lot from the other party. And so the other party's profits go down, and the cheaters one who lowered the price would see their profits go up. and the same goes for the other. And so in the end, what happens is they're going to keep competing and keep lowering their prices so that they become closer to competitive. So while it's in their best interest to not cheat, because over time, as soon as one cheats, the other one will, and in the end, it becomes tough because they both end up with those lower profits. And so that's why it can be tough to enforce these with an oligopoly. But in general, oligopoly, few firms, strong barriers to entry, they can make profits and they're going to be price setters. And they're going to have that option because they have that market power.